One thing that's really important to understand with CSS and HTML is that everything is a box. And I mean everything. So just as an example of that, if we come here and I say my paragraphs and I give this a background color, we'll do a fun one. We'll say lime. Lime's a nice bright color that we can see. And we can see that every one of these is a box. And just to highlight this, if I make this even bigger and I just get this word harness all on its own here. And so we can delete that background color for a second and hit refresh. When we look at it like this, it doesn't look like it's a box. It looks like it's just a string of text with like one little line there at the end. But as soon as I bring my background color on there and we take a look at it, we can see that no, it actually is a box. We have this one word that's just floating at the end, but the box fills up all of this space. It's really important to know everything is a box, especially true with block level elements. Inline elements are boxes as well, but if we come and do a strong, and with the strong, it's a little bit different because if we do we'll do a background of red on there. So we're getting really tacky now with our colors, but we can see that like it ends up making multiple boxes across the different lines to wrap everything around. And still though, it's really important. Everything is a box. However you're looking at it, just remember that because it brings in a really important thing with how everything works with what we're doing, and this really important concept that we're going to be talking about now, which is the box model, which is a really fundamental concept of how CSS works, and understanding that everything is a box, even if we don't see that box necessarily, it just makes your life a lot easier. So knowing everything is a box is super important. And then also knowing that the box is made up of multiple parts is really important. And the first thing we're going to talk about is the content box itself, and that we can actually size that. So let's do our H2s now, just so we can actually see them. And let's give those a background that is, we'll do something a bit less offensive than before. We'll do a light blue instead of the lime green, which is kind of bright. And we can see that even though it's a short heading, like before, it's stretching the full size. And this is something that's really important to know, is like this default behavior that we have going on right now, where the element is as wide as it can possibly be. It's going to fill up as much space as it can, and it fills up its parent. So whatever the size of the parent is, the block element will fill up that entire space. And that's really important, and it's a really good behavior. What's interesting though is if we come on my paragraphs and we see that there too, so we'll give background and I'll do a pink on there. It's another light color, a bit less offensive than red. And we'll get the same type of behavior where this is they're all as wide as they can possibly be, but the height of them is actually as small as they possibly can get to. And this is also really important. They'll be as small as they can, but they'll grow to fit the content that's inside of them. So this box, they're all the same width because they're all growing to be as wide as possible. But this second box here is bigger than the first paragraph here because it has more content in it. That content's wrapping onto another line, so that box has to get bigger. If we shrink this down and it gets smaller and smaller and smaller, you can see as the text is wrapping and it needs more vertical space, the boxes keep expanding to fill in that space, or as it gets wider and they need less space, they're able to shrink down. And this is fantastic. This is such a good default behavior. Remember this always, because just knowing that this is how the defaults work seems really silly. It's really intuitive how it works, but it's one of the fundamental concepts in creating layouts, and especially responsive layouts that are going to adapt to the different screen sizes we have to deal with. And it's not something enough people think about. It just works without us having to worry about it. The other important thing with this to know is sometimes people will add background colors on things, and I always encourage people to do that. Add background colors to things so you can visualize the boxes and see what the layout you're actually creating is. The problem is sometimes we'll add a background color and we won't have any content in there. And if that happens, you don't see anything. So that second paragraph is there, but we don't see that second paragraph because it has a height of 0 pixels. If I were to use those dev tools like we looked at before, I can inspect on here and I can come and take a look in here, and I'm going to find it in a second as 0 pixels, so it's hard to find. But it is, there's my H1, it'd be in this section, there's my H2, it's there. And you can even see it's getting highlighted on the page, and it shows me the dimensions, 578 wide by 0 pixels tall. We need content in things for them to have a size on them. So close that down, close this down, bring that content back in there so we actually have a size, except that's a little bit of a lie of what I just said. You need to have content in there to have a size if you haven't declared a size yourself. Be careful with declaring sizes, but it's important to know how we do it. So again, the default values are fantastic. don't declare a size unless you really need one. But sometimes you might need sizes on things. We'll see more practical use cases of these, but I do want to look at it very quickly with you. So I'm going to leave these sizes on here. We're going to go on these H2s, and I'm going to give them an inline size to start with. And let's just say it's 350 pixels. And now for my H2 have an inline size of 350. And I probably assume what the inline size is at this point. It's how wide the element is. This is a logical property. You will see other things where we'll see a width. Most things you will see will use width instead of inline size. Just like I mentioned when we were talking about the text alignment, I would really encourage you to use logical properties instead. So inline size is how wide an element can be. We're talking about the inline axis of our text. Now, when I set the inline size of 350, I'm limiting how big it is. So because of that, the text can't all fit next to each other. So it just creates a new line. The text wraps here where it needs to, whereas this one didn't have to, so it doesn't. Once again, it's adapting based on what we're doing, and if it needs to gain that height, it can. I can also set heights on things. Let's come on the paragraphs to do that. And let's set a block size this time. So block axis is our up and down, like we added the margins earlier. So block size is going to be let's just say we're going to do 350 this way as well. 350 pixels, hit refresh, and we're going to get all this extra space. You can see why we probably don't want to do this, right? Because different paragraphs are different heights, and doing this, especially if you didn't have a background color on there, would be kind of weird that you just have like these giant spaces like this. So maybe not something you want to do on paragraphs. There are times where you might need a height, though you do want to, heights are one of those ones you want to be really careful with. And the reason I say that is because if I change the width of something with my inline size and I make it narrower, it will grow, as we saw, in height to be able to adapt automatically based on the content that's in there. So, and that's just what the web does, right? So let's come here, and I'm going to make this 150 instead. So it's not as tall. And we can see these three, okay, not as bad. But what happens when this starts getting narrower like it did before? Remember, when I did this earlier, it automatically started getting bigger based on the content. Now what's actually happening is the text is spilling out the bottom of them. That's kind of weird. Let's make this smaller, 50. Now what's going to happen is we've said they're 50. So they're always going to be 50. And the text is going to spill out. And not only is the text spilling out, but it's overlapping. And that's because CSS won't hide content that doesn't fit in there as a default. It just overflows that content because it wants to be lossless. We don't want to hide things because things aren't big enough to show what's inside of them, because that could potentially cause issues. But as soon as we start setting block sizes or heights on things, because again, you will see a lot of places will use a height instead of a block size. This is the non-logical version, and the block size, which I would encourage you to use, is the logical version. Is the logical property. So use block size to set how tall you want something to be, because we're setting sizes on things, right? So the block size on there is 50, and I'm probably breaking things. When it comes to content and stuff, if you have like an icon and you need to set how big that is, set a size on it. But be very careful. Inline size, sometimes you'll need. Block size, just be really careful with it and just ask yourself, do I really need this before I start applying it? Because it's a very easy way to start running into problems. And we don't want to set prescribed sizes on things because the web is this thing that can move around and adjust and everything. And we're going to see that when we start creating layouts in not too far from now, that things can change and move around. And there's ways of prescribing where we want them to be and sort of the layout that we want, but we do need to make it be able to adapt as well. So just because we see a layout, then, just because we see a layout and we see like, oh, this area looks like it has a height of 400 pixels, doesn't mean we need to set that. The content will just take up the space that it needs to take up. But every now and then you will need these. It's important to know about them. So I am showing them to you in this lesson with the big caveat of only use it if you absolutely need to. Put all your content first and then decide if you absolutely need an inline size or a block size afterwards.